Hello, sports fans. Welcome through Sports Central. Today, we're going to go over every NFL team's biggest offseason need. So, going through division by division, starting in the AFC East with the Buffalo Bills. So, the Bills, their biggest need is to get a receiver. Khalil Shakir is solid for the Bills, and he already signed an extension. Plus, they have Keon Coleman, who will be going into his second year. But the Bills, they need another receiver, and ideally a true wide receiver one. They brought in Amari Cooper midseason, and they thought he could be that guy, but he did not find much success. Now he's a free agent, and the Bills' top priority is to get Josh Allen a go-to receiver. Moving on to the Dolphins, and their biggest need is the offensive line. The Dolphins, they've got Teron Armstead at left tackle, and he's great when healthy, but not always healthy. And outside of him, there's some holes. The Dolphins, they've got a few free agents along the offensive line. Tua already struggles to stay healthy, so the least the Dolphins can do is give him some protection. But the Dolphins need to improve the offensive line. The Jets' biggest need is finding a quarterback. They said they're going to move on from Aaron Rodgers, which is definitely the right decision. But now they need to find a quarterback, unless they want to go with Tyrod Taylor or Jordan Travis. But I doubt they'd want to start either of those guys next year. And even if they end up starting Tyrod Taylor, he's not their long-term answer. But the Jets need to find their quarterback in the future. For the Patriots, their biggest need is the offensive line. You could say receiver, but I would argue for the Patriots at this moment, offensive line is more important. Drake May showed some promise in his rookie year, but the Patriots, they've had one of the worst offensive lines in the NFL, as they allowed 52 sacks, which was fifth most in the NFL. So they really need to improve the offensive line, so Drake May is not playing the games from his back. The biggest need for the Ravens is pretty tough, because they're a pretty good team, despite coming up short in the playoffs. But I think the Ravens' focus this offseason should be on the offensive line. The offensive line got better as the season progressed, but they've now got a couple of starters along the offensive line, with Ronnie Stanley and Patrick McCarry both set to become free agents. But the Ravens, they could bring them back or look elsewhere, but they should definitely focus on the offensive line. The Steelers, their biggest need is a quarterback. Russell Wilson and Justin Fields are both free agents. I've seen some people say they should bring back Justin Fields and give him a chance to be the full-time starting quarterback. I'm not the biggest Justin Fields fan. Definitely think that could work, but whatever the Steelers do at quarterback, they'll probably end up going like 9-8 anyway, because that's what they always do. But the Steelers, they need to find a quarterback who's not just okay. They need to find like an actually good quarterback. That's their biggest need. Moving on to the Bengals, and their top priority is tough because they have two pretty big things they can do. One, re-sign T. Higgins, and two is fix the defense, which was terrible and cost the team a playoff spot. Now, both are very important for the Bengals, and if I'm the Bengals, I would say the defense is probably slightly more important, although the Bengals definitely have an offense-first mindset, so they might opt to go with T. Higgins, but either re-sign T. Higgins or improve the defense. Can't go wrong with either. That's the Bengals' biggest need. The biggest need for the Browns is a quarterback. Deshaun Watson is terrible, plus he's not always healthy, and he tore his Achilles. And the Browns, they've needed a quarterback for the last 25 years, and this is no different. For the Texans, their biggest need is along the offensive line. CJ Stroud took a step back this past season, and a big reason why was the Texans' offensive line. As they allowed 54 sacks, which was third most in the NFL, and the Texans, they need to give CJ Stroud some time. They've got some decent players along the offensive line, but can definitely get a lot better. For the Colts, their top priority is developing Anthony Richardson. He hasn't been great when he's played. He's also struggled to stay healthy. But as far as a positional need goes for the Colts, I would say corner because they were not very good against the pass. The Jaguars, their biggest need is in the secondary. They had the worst pass defense in the NFL, and they need to get better there because this is a Jaguars team with some potential despite being awful this past season. But they brought a new coaching staff, new GM. They've got some potential, but need to address the secondary. The Titans, their biggest need is also quarterback. Will Levis is clearly not their long-term answer, as he threw 13 touchdowns and 12 interceptions this season. But luckily for the Titans, they do have the first overall pick, where they should be able to secure their quarterback in the future. For the Chiefs, their top need is offensive line. More specifically, left tackle, but we saw the Chiefs in the Super Bowl. Their offensive line was terrible. Mahomes was pressured on over half his dropbacks, and the Eagles didn't blitz once. But the Chiefs, they need to find a way to improve the offensive line, find a long-term answer at left tackle, and not have guys playing all out of position. Moving on to the Chargers, and their biggest need is definitely receiver. The Chargers receiver room is awful. They got Lad McConkey, who was great as a rookie, but outside of him, it's pretty rough. They got Quentin Johnston, who can't catch, and their next best guy is Josh Palmer, who's a free agent. But the Chargers, they desperately need to get Justin Herbert some weapons. Moving on to the Broncos, and they're an interesting one, because they're a team without necessarily a huge hole. But I would say either running back or tight end. They haven't had a 1,000-yard running back since Philip Lindsay in 2019, and their top option at tight end is Adam Troutman, who caught just 13 passes this past season. But the Broncos, they can definitely use another playmaker on offense. The Raiders' biggest need is quarterback. Their quarterbacks this past season, Aiden O'Connell, Gardner Minshew, and Desmond Ridder. Obviously not very good. Now, the Raiders, they were looking to trade for Matthew Stafford. Obviously, that didn't happen, but the Raiders, they need to find somebody to play quarterback. Moving on to the teams in the NFC, and starting off with the Super Bowl champs, the Eagles. So it's hard to find a need for the Eagles considering they are extremely well balanced and just won the Super Bowl in dominant fashion. But if I had to find a need for the Eagles, I would say linebacker. Zach Bond was great this past season as he was a Defensive Player of the Year finalist and an All-Pro, but he's a free agent, and they could also look to get somebody else because Nakobe Dean, he's good when healthy, but not always on the field. But if you had to find a need for the Eagles, I would say linebacker. The Commanders' biggest need is in the secondary. Their numbers might not say that because they're actually the third best pass defense in the league this past year, but I definitely think they can improve the secondary. Marshawn Lattimore was not very good since they traded for him at the trade deadline, and safety Jeremy Chin and corner Benjamin St. Juste are both free agents, and I like Jeremy Chin, but at corner they can definitely do a lot better. The Cowboys' biggest need is along the defensive line. Micah Parsons is great and among best in the NFL, but outside of him, they could use some help. DeMarcus Lawrence is getting older, and he's also a free agent. Winval Joseph hits free agency as well, and he's also getting older. And second-year defensive tackle Mozzie Smith hasn't exactly lived up to the first-round potential. But the Cowboys can definitely get Micah Parsons some help along the defensive line. For the Giants, their biggest need is definitely quarterback. The Giants, they currently have 0 quarterbacks on their roster, which might not be a bad thing considering how bad their quarterbacks have been. But the Giants, they tried to trade for Matthew Stafford, that didn't happen, but they need to find a quarterback, and whether that's making a big move in the draft, or signing a free agent, or both, definitely need to do something to address the quarterback position. The Lions, they're another team that's tougher to come up with a big need because on paper they have a really good team. And they might be the best team in the NFL, although they were decimated by injuries this past season. But the Lions' biggest need, I would say, is either corner or edge rusher. But I would say edge. Aiden Hutchinson, he's great, and he was on an insane pace before he got hurt. But outside of him, there's not a ton. Zadarius Smith, he's solid but getting older, and Marcus Davenport and John Kaminsky are both free agents. Moving on to the biggest need for the Vikings. So they're an interesting team because they had a great year before they fell apart at the end. They have to make a decision at quarterback, although I wouldn't necessarily consider that a need. But I would say the Vikings' top priority is corner. Byron Murphy and Stephon Gilmore are both free agents, plus Stephon Gilmore will be 35 by the start of next season. Next team is the Packers, and I could see this being argued a few different ways. You could say edge rusher or a true wide receiver one. I like some of the receivers the Packers have, but I just don't know if there's a true go-to guy. So I can definitely see the Packers trying to get them, but they could also use some more production outside of Rashawn Gary. The biggest need for the Bears is very easily the offensive line. Caleb Williams was sacked a league-high 68 times during his rookie season, and they've got a decent supporting cast around him, they just need to give him time. The biggest need for the Buccaneers is probably edge rusher. The Buccaneers, they had a solid pass rush this season, but most of their production came from the guys on the interior, like Kalijah Cansey and Vita Vea. But the Buccaneers, they need to get somebody who can be a consistent threat off the edge, especially with Tyron Shoyinka being a free agent. Moving on to the Falcons, and their biggest need is definitely a pass rusher. The Falcons' pass rush was awful this past year, which is 31 sacks, which was second fewest in the NFL. Matt Judon's also a free agent, and he wasn't even that great for the Falcons. But the Falcons, they definitely need to improve the pass rush. It could be on the interior, off the edge. Just gotta find a way to get pressure on opposing quarterbacks. The Saints' biggest need is tough because there's a lot of problems with the Saints team. They're way over the salary cap, all their good players are old, and they need a quarterback. But quarterback probably is the biggest need for the Saints Derek Carr has not been good, and he's clearly not their long-term solution. Spencer Rattler started a few games at the end of last season, but I don't really think he's their quarterback of the future either. But the Saints, they need to find their long-term answer at quarterback. Moving on to the Panthers, and their biggest need is improving the defense. The Panthers' defense was worst in the NFL this past season, allowing 31.4 points per game, and it doesn't really matter where on the defense the Panthers address, they just need to do something to improve the defense. Moving on to the Rams. So the Rams are an interesting one, but I would say their biggest need is receiver. Puka Nacua is great, but outside of him, the Rams, they can use some help. Cooper Kupp is also good, but the Rams, they're looking to trade him. And Demarcus Robinson and Tutu Atwell are both free agents, plus the Rams can probably do better. But the Rams, they just extended Matthew Stafford, now they should get him some more weapons. Moving on to the Seahawks, and their biggest need is by far the offensive line. The offensive line really held the Seahawks team back this past season, as they allowed 54 sacks, which is tied for third most in the NFL. And the Seahawks, they've got a pretty solid team overall, but if they can fix the offensive line, especially the interior, this could be a pretty good Seahawks team and probably a playoff team moving forward. Next team is the 49ers. So the 49ers are an interesting one, but I would say their biggest need is either along the offensive line or the defensive line. But I would say the defensive line. The 49ers defense wasn't great this past year. Their edge rushers were great with Nick Bosa and Leonard Floyd, but outside of them, they didn't get a ton of production. They had a few defensive linemen who are set to become free agents like Devon Hargrave, so they can definitely look to replace them. And our final team, it is the Arizona Cardinals. So the biggest need for the Cardinals is definitely a pass rusher. The Cardinals, they did not have a single player with more than 5 sacks this past year. Now the Cardinals, they did get a decent number of sacks just spread out among a ton of guys. Plus they've got first-round pick Darius Robinson, but I'd like to see the Cardinals go get another impactful defensive lineman. But that is every NFL team's biggest offseason need as we head into the 2025 offseason. Let me know in the comments if you agree with what I said for your team. If you disagree, I'd love to hear your thoughts. But that's all for this video. Thank you guys for watching. Be sure to like this video, subscribe, turn notifications. I do my best to post as often as possible, and I will see you in the next video.